The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the ICBA. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning for Encirca's webinar on securing your brand in .bank, a primer for banks interested in the .bank domain name extension. I'd like to introduce you to our presenters. Unfortunately, our first presenter, Viveka Ware, will not be able to make it with us today. Her part will be covered by Thomas Barrett. So Thomas Barrett is president of Encirca, the first .bank accredited registrar founded in 2001, the sole registrar serving on FTLD's Security Requirements Working Group. Encirca is also a trademark agent for the Trademark Clearinghouse. We also have Craig Schwartz with us today, Registry Managing Director of FTLD, managing .bank and .insurance domain registries. He is also former Chief Registry Liaison with ICANN. Then we also have John McElwain, partner of Nelson, Mullins, Riley & Scarborough. He focuses on intellectual property litigation and strategy, voted one of the best lawyers in America from 2013 throughout 2015. He is also vice chair of the Internet Committee for the International Trademark Association. Our agenda today will be covering introduction to new GTLDs, .bank policies, trademark protection, and how to secure your desired domain name in .bank. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please enter them into the question box in the lower right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar application. I'd also like to inform you that this webinar will be recorded and will be published on Encirca's website afterwards. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it to Tom Barrett for introduction to new GTLDs. Tom?
Thank you, Andrew. Welcome everyone to today's .bank webinar for ICBA members. As many of you may be aware, the Internet is undergoing a dramatic expansion of top-level domains such as .com, .net. Over 400 were launched last year, and a similar number are expected to be launched in 2015. Every one of these extensions have a very structured launch program where there's a mandatory sunrise period first for trademark owners who have registered their trademark not only with a national trademark office like the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, but also with the Trademark Clearinghouse, which has been set up expressly for this new expansion. All of these new registries must also sell their domain names via ICANN accredited registrars such as Encirca or GoDaddy. GoDaddy, by the way, is not supporting .bank, but you're probably familiar with them from their Super Bowl ads. Finally, the .bank top-level domain, which we're talking about today, is planning to launch its sunrise period in May and then a general availability period in June. The same registry behind .bank is also going to be launching .insurance later in this fall of 2015. Next slide. So how is .bank different from .com and your current .bank's website? First of all, unlike .com, .bank was conceived, funded, and is managed by the banking community. You'll hear more about who the founders are in a few minutes. And so it's truly designed to address the needs of the industry. There are very strict eligibility criteria in terms of who can get a .bank domain name. There's very specific rules about what types of names you can apply for. They must correspond to your current bank name in some way. And finally, there are very strict security requirements required to set up and use the .bank domain name. Next slide, please. So at a high level, what are the benefits of .bank? how is it different from what consumers see today for the typical banking website? With .bank, with their strict security requirements, it will become the trusted and secure location for consumers to conduct their online banking, and it really establishes this foundation where banks can start to communicate equally with their customers, stakeholders, and regulators in a way that delivers confidence for consumers in terms of interacting with their bank online. And so I think we're pretty excited to see the growth and innovation that will come for the banking sector due to .bank. So the ICBA is sponsoring this webinar along with Encirca. The ICBA is a founder of FTLD, which is the registry operator for .bank and insurance, and you'll hear from their founder in a second. And Encirca has partnered with the ICBA to help all ICBA members understand what .bank is all about, to be able to make sure that their applications for .bank are successful through the verification process, through either Sunrise or general availability, to help all banks who are ICBA members activate those new domain names in the required manner, and finally to receive a discount on .bank by virtue of being an ICBA member. Andrew, that's off to you to talk about the next segment.
Thank you, Tom. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Craig Schwartz so he can tell us about .bank policies.
Thank you, Tom and Andrew, and to the ICBA for inviting FTLD to participate in today's webinar. We welcome every opportunity that's possible to connect with interested banks to ensure we're providing you the best information you need and to ensure you have as smooth a registration process as possible in .bank. I first would like to say a few brief words about FTLD registry services, since we may be unfamiliar to some on the call. As Tom mentioned in his opening remarks, ICBA is one of the founding members of this company. Our mission is to operate GTLDs to serve and protect the banking and insurance sectors. And what do we mean by serving and protecting? It's all about creating a trusted channel on the internet for banks and their customers. And this trust is really earned by the verification and security requirements that we'll get to a little bit later in the presentation. It's also, as Tom mentioned, a community or sector-created operator entity established by a number of banks and insurance companies. And if you're interested in learning more about who our founding members are, they're identified on the endorsers page at www.ftld.com. Though we were formed in 2011, we've been working very hard the last more than 3 years to win the right to operate the .bank TLD. During that time, we've undertaken a number of community-based activities, such as the formation of a security requirements working group. That is the group that developed the requirements that will be implemented for .bank and .insurance. We've also got an advisory council that was formed as a mechanism to provide ongoing input to our work. And Tom already mentioned when we'll be launching our domains. Our key technology partners are VeriSign, which is our technical infrastructure service provider, Symantec, which is our verification agent, and we'll hear a lot more about verification later. Several ICANN accredited registrars that have been approved by us to retail our domain names, and Encirca is one of those. And then, of course, we've got a relationship with ICANN, which is the quasi-regulatory body with oversight for entities operating top-level domains, as well as the entities that sell them, such as Encirca. So today I'll be reviewing the materials on slides 10 to 13 that are all core features of creating a .bank that's trusted, protected, more secure, and easily identifiable on the internet for you and your customers. What differentiates us from every other top-level domain, be it old or new, are the eligibility requirements, which we'll get to shortly, and our enhanced security elements. Let's move on to slide 10, where we talk about strict eligibility. So in our application to ICANN for .bank, we said it would be available to members of the global banking community, and subsequently FTLD's advisory council and its board of directors defined the eligible entities as those listed on slide 10. While we anticipate a majority of the registrations will be made by banks, we know that there are also other important stakeholders in the sector, such as trade associations and core processors, that may want to participate and have a real need to participate in .bank. Certainly with core processors, their ability to have a .bank domain could be critical as it relates to the services they already provide for many of you on your existing domain names. But today we're going to primarily focus on banks using banks. Let's move on to slide 11, where it's leading with bank has enhanced security. So it's these requirements plus others that make us different and better out of the box than any other commercially available domain extension. Mandatory verification, which Tom will cover in more detail when we get to slide 20, ensures that we know who you are, and as a result, banks and consumers can trust that what they find at a .bank website or an email that they receive using a .bank domain is legitimate and has been verified. So in short, the verification process entails verifying that the person that's requested the domain name is actually a full-time employee of the bank. And we will also, when I say we, that is Semantic, our verification agent, will also call the bank to ensure that the person who's requested the domain name is authorized by the bank to make the registration. So there will be a phone call to your bank to perform the verification piece. There's also a host of security requirements that are technical in nature, such as those listed here on the page, and I'll say a little bit about some of them. So DNSSEC, which is Domain Name System Security Extensions, when enabled, there is a cryptographic key associated with the domain name that protects the integrity of the data associated with the registration. It's effectively establishing a chain of trust, and that value is that when Internet users get to a site that has DNSSEC on it that they can trust, that where they got to is actually where they intended to be, that they're actually seeing information that's provided by that verified organization. Email authentication is intended to mitigate phishing and spoofing by having email providers such as Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo follow policies that you set for your domain. For example, you might set a policy that says, we don't use our domain for email, and thus anything purporting to be from your bank's email address would be rejected by the email provider and thus never get to the intended recipient. Your policy also might say, we only send email from a specific set of IP addresses, and if mail, again, purporting to be from your bank, is not from an authorized IP address, the email provider, again, will reject the email, and it doesn't ever get to the intended recipient. So thereby, that's the mitigating phishing and spoofing. Enhanced encryption is to ensure that data sent over the Internet using a .bank domain is protected from, for example, tampering. Multi-factor authentication is something that is used at both the registry level and the registrar level. For you all, whether you're using Encirca or some other domain name registrar, you will have to go through a multi-factor authentication process in order for you to change data associated with your registration. And the value of multi-factor authentication is that it will prohibit anyone else from accessing your accounts and changing data, such as manipulating your name servers and thus potentially redirecting domain traffic to some site other than yours. Let's move on to the next slide, 12. We talk about naming selection for .bank. So this policy is in place to ensure that a domain name is not granted to a bank unless it can demonstrate its right to have it, and also that deceptive or fraudulent registrations, such as Bank of America with a 0 instead of an O, are not made. Further, FTLD is restricted by ICANN from allowing certain types of domains, such as those of countries, those containing unusual characters, etc. One item that John will get to a little bit later as it relates to the sunrise period, or the period when banks with trademarks registered in ICANN Trademark Clearinghouse can register. Domain names during the sunrise period must be an exact match of your mark. That is, for example, if the mark is ABC Community Bank, the domain name registered must be abccommunitybank.bank. During general availability, the naming policies are more relaxed, and domain names must correspond to the trademark, trade name, or service mark of your organization. And it's also important to note that trademarks don't have to be registered in order for you to have a right to use it. For banks, perhaps they've been using the same name and or domain name for years and years and years. You've probably at that point established a common law right to use that name, and you could thus then use it and register it in .bank. Excuse me. Looking at the bottom bullet where we talk about common community names, for now there are some names we're not going to give out, such as common community names or those that are shared by a large number of banks. For example, the word community or First National or security. And we're also not going to give out generic names such as checking.bank or savings.bank. On the common community names, because so many are shared by so many banks, FTLD made the decision not to award those at all, at least for now, rather than either giving it to the first person that comes in the door or perhaps auctioning it off to the entity with the deepest pockets. Our thinking is, because there are so many banks that share these same names, that to give it to one and having 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 other banks be really disappointed in the process just was not worth it for us, and we simply opted to take it off the list. Just to be clear about common community restrictions, the name that appears on that list is the only name that's restricted. So if it's community, the only domain name that can't be awarded is community.bank. It doesn't mean that you can't be creative with your naming structure. So if you're the Community Bank of Texas, you might want Community Bank TX, you might want CommunityTX.bank. So there's a lot of flexibility around the names that can be used. And if you have any questions, if you're going to use INCIRCA, they can certainly walk you through understanding that process better. For the list of the common community and generic names that are reserved, INCIRCA has been kind enough to create a URL so you can view those names for yourself. If you move on to slide 13, which are examples of corresponding domain names, this is by no means an exhaustive list of how you might choose a name, but we thought it would be helpful to at least provide some examples of how you can be creative in the domain names that you select for your bank. So with that, I will turn it back over to Andrew.
Thank you, Craig. At this moment, regarding trademark protection, I'd like to turn it over to John McElwain. John?
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to ICBA. As many of you can imagine, the impact and overlap of trademarks on the domain name system is significant. But I think a good starting point for understanding the impact of trademarks here is to take a look at the .bank launch phases. And a even better starting point for looking at this particular slide is to first dive into some of the terminology. So you see there the acronym TMCH. You've heard Craig speak about the Trademark Clearinghouse as well as Tom. TMCH is a trademark clearinghouse, which is an entity that validates and serves as a repository of trademark data to assist registries in operating a sunrise process and a claims notice process. A sunrise period, which you've also heard about today, is an early priority registration period open to only trademark clearinghouse registrants. General availability is a period when anyone meeting the registrant eligibility policy for .bank can apply for a .bank domain name. So looking at this chart, you can see here that at this moment, banks that have a trademark should be working on getting their trademarks registered in the Trademark Clearinghouse. This process needs to be completed by approximately May 10th because of the amount of time it takes to get a trademark approved and validated by the Trademark Clearinghouse. As you've heard, trademarks or domain name registrations will be handled on a first-come, first-served allocation in both the Sunrise and general availability. So it's important to keep the date in mind that the Sunrise period will start at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on May 17th. The general availability period, open to all banks, will start at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on June 23rd. To be eligible to place a trademark into the Trademark Clearinghouse, for most banks, this is going to be a United States federal trademark registration issued by the United States Patent and Trademark Office. That is what we refer to there as a national word mark. When we use the term word mark, that does not mean it just is typed characters. It just means that the characters must be separable from a significant design element. Most bank names will qualify as word marks. Although rarely used, word marks that have been validated or trademarks that have been validated through a court of law can also be lodged with the Trademark Clearinghouse, and word marks or bank names protected by statutes or treaties can also be submitted to the Trademark Clearinghouse. What is not eligible are state trademark registrations, common law trademark rights, or any trademarks that contain a top-level domain name extension like .com, or even a period in your trademark would invalidate it, even if on the federal level, from putting it into the Trademark Clearinghouse. Move on to the next. As you've heard several times today, to take part in the Sunrise for .bank, you need to have an eligible Trademark Clearinghouse registration. There is still time to get validated. As we said, we recommend by May 10th because the Trademark Clearinghouse process takes about a week. But the following need to be kept in mind. Remember, again, allocation during Sunrise is on a first-come, first-served basis. In a few minutes, Tom Barrett will speak about how banks can deal with this situation. You must use an accredited registrar like Encirca. There will still be verification. So in other words, there will still be a look at the application for .bank. And as Craig mentioned, the corresponding rule does not apply during Sunrise. In other words, your .bank domain name registration must be an exact match to the trademark that you have registered in the Trademark Clearinghouse. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Andrew.
Thank you, John. Now, regarding how to secure your desired .bank domain name, Tom Barrett.
Thank you, Andrew. And let me just remind people, if you have any questions, simply enter your questions into the question box on your GoToWebinar widget. We will be addressing any questions you have at the end of this webinar. As John mentioned, there's first a Sunrise period for folks who have a registered trademark and have submitted those trademarks into the Trademark Clearinghouse for the Sunrise period. Most banks, however, have not done that, and so they qualify for the general availability period, which starts at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on June 23rd. It is a first-come, first-served type of process, just like Sunrise, which means if you have a name that is similar to a bank somewhere else in the world, not only the U.S., but anywhere in the world, then whoever applies for that name first gets that name. So because it's pretty much is a race to the starting line here, Encirca has a pre-screening process to make sure that you have all your data accurate at the time of submission to ensure that it's successful. The applications that we receive are going to be submitted automatically on June 23rd in the order in which you actually pay for that name. And so we do suggest that you submit payment up front or as soon as possible. We do accept a variety of payment methods. You can apply for as many names as you wish. You can apply for 1 year to up to 10 years. There is an annual fee. And the corresponding rules apply during general availability. So that means that you can in addition to applying for your exact bank name, you can add qualifiers such as your geographic area. You can say, I love Eastern Bank or my Reading Bank. So you can add any sort of prefix or suffix to your bank name. You can abbreviate it. You can use an acronym for your bank name and apply for multiple names under those rules. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the verification process. So once we submit your name for registration, and again, if you go through the pre-screening process, we will submit it automatically for you on June 23rd. It goes into a pending status, and it will stay in that pending status until you complete the verification process with Symantec. So Symantec, which has been hired by FTLD, will consult third-party sources to confirm that the information that's been provided does represent a chartered bank. They will verify that the domain names that are being requested correspond to the bank's legal name. They'll verify the physical address. They'll verify that the phone number that's been provided is a match to the primary telephone number for the bank. So make sure that if you're the person applying on behalf of your bank, you do not provide your cell number or your direct dial number. It must be the general primary number for the bank. They will also call to verify the employment of the person applying for the name and the fact that they have authority to apply on behalf of the bank. And they'll do that by either calling your supervisor or your HR department. So both of those pieces of information need to be provided as part of your application. The contact must be a full-time employee of the bank. So it cannot be a trademark lawyer or outside lawyer. It cannot be someone else who's handling this registration on your behalf, such as a core processor or registrar. That contact information must be a full-time employee. As I said, the manager or HR representative must be able to take that call via the bank's primary phone number. We're saying in terms of expectations that it will take less than 5 days. I know the goal for the registry is to have it happen within 2 days. And this verification process will happen every 2 years. So it's a recurring process that the bank must continue to go through. Next slide. The pricing for each .bank domain name is $999 per year. That price is the same every year, not only for the first year, but for renewals as well. That includes both the verification fee as well as the registration fee. So your registrar will collect both at the time of your application. And there is a refund provided if for any reason your application is not successful or canceled, minus a processing fee. Now, Encirca has made an agreement with the ICBA so that all of their members receive a discount on this fee of approximately 10%. And so you can do the math in terms of what your annual fee would be for .bank. And we also offer several payment options. As you come to our website, you can pay via a credit card, you can fax us your credit card information, or you can pay by credit card later. You also can simply mail us a check or pay via ACH or bank wire. The important point to remember is that your payment must be received in order to add your application to our submission queue. And if you are competing with other banks for the same name, your position in that queue will be very important because it determines, if we have 1,000 applications, are you number one in that queue or are you number 1,000? There's not a huge time difference, but we've found that seconds can make a difference for some of the fairly generic types of names. If you require an internal review process or approval process for the cost, we can help accommodate you there with a pro forma invoice or a purchase order. And so just let us know if you'd like to manage that type of process for your application. Next slide. So how do you make sure you get the name you want and are successful the first time through? Our advice is to start now. We're already handling many pre-screening applications from banks, and we're already processing payments today. You do need to determine what names you want. You need to determine if you think you'll have competition for those names, either in the U.S. or somewhere else in the world. You need to decide if there's a trademark that might exist on that name, and we can help you check whether or not a trademark has already exists, for example, in the Trademark Clearinghouse for an existing bank. So we can tell you that information so you'll know if you perhaps might have competition during the Trademark Clearinghouse sunrise period. And you need to, of course, reserve your spot in the queue with your payment. Next slide. So that's our webinar for today. Again, if you have any questions, please submit them into the question box. After this webinar is over, there will also be a quick 3-question survey that we'll ask you to fill out about the webinar. In terms of your next steps, you can go to www.encirca.com/ICBA and fill out our initial form to start the process. You can also send us an email or give us a call once you've completed that form to schedule a free consultation with Encirca. If you have any questions about your trade eligibility for the Trademark Clearinghouse, please feel free to contact John at john.mcelwain@nelsonmullins.com. Thank you very much for your time today, and I'll hand it over to Andrew for any questions there might be.
Thank you, Tom. We have quite a few questions. I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded and will be published on the Encirca website, www.encirca.com/ICBA, under the Webinar tab found in the header. The slides will also be made available at the same URL. So our first question is concerning generic named banks. Craig, what would your recommendation be for securing a .bank domain name if they're unable to secure their legal generic name?
So, as you can look at the list of names, the generic names on Encirca's website, and figure out pretty quickly whether there's cause to have concern or not. And as I mentioned earlier, our intent is not to prohibit a bank from securing a domain that corresponds to their legal name. If for some reason the domain, the name you're interested in is listed on the generic list, we have what's called a registrant eligibility dispute resolution process. It's basically a process provided by an external service provider, the National Arbitration Forum, where you can basically submit a complaint stating what it is the domain name is that you're seeking and why you think you're entitled to it, and that organization will process that request. So if you have concerns about this, check the list first. If the name that you're thinking about registering is not on that list, then you have nothing to be concerned about. If you see it on the list, I'd actually ask you to reach out to me directly at craig@ftld.com to see what we might be able to do to resolve this before it becomes a headache for your bank.
Hey, Craig, this is John McElwain. I would add that I think having gotten calls from clients on similar topics, looking at the FTLD name selection policy does provide some good ideas for alternative names for banks faced in that situation.
Thank you, John and Craig. Our next question would be, why do I not see my current registrar under the list of certified registrars available for .bank, such as HostGator or GoDaddy?
Sure, I'll take that one, Andrew. So this is Craig. So we go through a fairly heavy vetting process for our registrars before we'll accept them to distribute .bank and .insurance domain names. And the verification process that we have for .bank, coupled with the enhanced security requirements, means that there is much more work for registrars. And the registrars that are willing to do the extra work to comply with our specific .bank policies are the ones that are signing up to work with us. For more traditional, or not traditional, but common registrars such as GoDaddy, they typically do not work with specialized registries because it requires a lot of reconfiguring of their systems and or building new systems. So if you don't see your registrar listed on our approved registrars webpage, it means they don't want to work with us based upon our requirements, and or they haven't yet decided that.
Okay, thank you. Now, regarding registering trademarks through the Trademark Clearinghouse, I believe this was for you, John. Is it too late to register for a trademark now?
It is too late to register for a trademark if we're referring to applying for a trademark registration to obtain one, to put it into the Trademark Clearinghouse. So the process at the United States Patent and Trademark Office takes about, at the shortest time, 8 months for a trademark to issue. So it would be too late to apply to get a trademark now and then put that into the Trademark Clearinghouse. If the question is it too late to put a trademark into that's already registered into the Trademark Clearinghouse? No. If you can get the Trademark Clearinghouse to issue a validated and issue what's called a signed mark data file, SMD file, anytime prior to the sunrise period opening on the 17th, that would be sufficient. As you heard a number of us say, it takes several days for that verification process to occur at the Trademark Clearinghouse, so we're advising that you get applications into the Trademark Clearinghouse at least a week in advance.
Thank you. Now, as a follow-up to that question, does the bank's registered trademark need to be registered within U.S. jurisdiction to enter into the Trademark Clearinghouse?
It does not need to be registered within the U.S., so a foreign national registration or regional registration, such as a community trademark, will apply. Keep in mind, however, that in order to get a sunrise registration, you have to also submit an example of actual use of the mark in commerce. So there's no gaming of the system by getting a bogus foreign trademark registration. You have to actually submit a specimen of use. But But to answer the question fully, yes, a foreign registration can be used to secure a trademark clearinghouse spot.
And Andrew, this is Tom Barrett. I'll just make one other comment. A common question we have is, in the U.S., there are state-level trademarks, such as the state of Texas or California. Those state-level trademarks are not eligible for the Trademark Clearinghouse. So you must have a federal registration at the national level, such as the U.S., or a multi-regional one, such as a community trademark in the European Union.
Okay, thank you, John and Tom. Regarding .bank registrations, are banks allowed to apply for multiple domain names?
I can take this question. It's Tom Barrett again. Banks are allowed to apply for as many names as they wish, as long as all of those names are derived from their existing legal name. And so if you want your full legal name, in addition to that, you can also apply for an abbreviation or an acronym or a qualifier, such as I love blank, or this is my favorite blank .bank. You can apply for as many names as you want. Each one will require that annual fee of $999 minus the 10% ICBA discount.
Thank you, Tom. And I'd also like to add that each one would require that it corresponds with the actual bank name, correct?
That is correct. It should be obvious. You have a lot of latitude, but it should be obvious to Symantec how you came up with the name you're asking for.
Okay,
Hey,
thank you.
Tom and Andrew, can I add one point on there?
Yep.
And that is, so the rule is it has to correspond to your trade name, your trademark, your service mark. If you have a trademark registration for the best bank ever, you would be entitled to register the best bank ever .bank. So it's not always 100% associated with your legal banking name, but it's associated with your trademark, your trade name, or your service mark. So just a distinction to make.
That's correct.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. Now, regarding sunrise period participation, how would one go about registering with the Trademark Clearinghouse?
So this is Tom again from Encirca. You have to go, you can apply directly to yourself at trademark-clearinghouse.com, or you can go through a trademark agent, and Encirca is a trademark agent, so we can certainly handle your application to the Trademark Clearinghouse well before the requirement for sunrise.
Okay, thank you. Now, will Encirca allow customers to redirect their .com website to their .bank domain name?
That's a great question, Andrew. There are special requirements in terms of activating .bank domain names, and so you might want to talk to your current website hosting provider to see if they can support that. So, for example, .bank domain name does need to use .bank name servers in order to be activated. You are certainly free to redirect that .bank domain name to your existing website once it becomes activated using your .bank name servers. So just to be clear, it's not required that you activate it right away. Many banks want to secure their name first and then go through the planning process that will be required to activate it. So the first step, obviously, is to secure your name, get it verified with Symantec, and then you can set up the .bank name servers. You can redirect that to your existing website, so you don't need to build a brand new website initially. You can certainly redirect it to what you have. And I think Craig can tell you more about the plans, how the FTLD registry will help banks with this migration process.
Right. We're in the process right now of developing a transition guide, and the transition guide will have three components. One, a business overview of what the technical requirements are, what their value is, and then there'll be a technical piece that gets into the nitty-gritty detail of how you do the various implementations or what the recommended implementations are to comply with the security requirements. There'll also be a communications section of the guide, and that is how could you potentially talk to your customers about this? How could you talk to your employees about this? How could you talk to the media about this? So a baseline communication strategy for how you can message to different stakeholders around your planned use of .bank. The transition guide is estimated to be available in early May, and quite honestly, we haven't yet determined whether we will simply make it available to anyone or if we will make it available to entities that have registered domains in .bank. So there's I need to get back to you on that one question.
Okay, thank you, Craig. In regards to pricing, is the price that we saw during this presentation per domain name every year, or does that include multiple domain names?
So this is Tom Barrett from Encirca. The pricing is for a single domain name. And so it's $999 a year minus the 10% discount for ICBA. So let's call that $900 a year. If your bank name is the North space Eastern space bank and you want to get northeastern.bank, you can pay one fee for northeastern.bank. If you also want to replace your space in your name with a hyphen, and so you get north-eastern.bank, that requires an additional fee. So every unique string that you apply for requires a fee for that domain name. And it's a per annual fee, so you repeat that every year.
Thank you, Tom. And is the pricing different from other .bank registrars?
Again, this is Tom Barrett again. Every ICANN registrar sets their own pricing. Some of them will publish the pricing on their website. So if you go, obviously, to the registry's website and click on each one, you'll be able to see that. I do believe Encirca is one of the more competitive prices in the industry, but I invite you to check and see what other people are charging as well. You want to talk about that, Greg?
Sure. As Tom mentioned, every registrar sets their own price. FTLD, as the registry operator, has set the wholesale price of domains, and that price is the same to every registrar. But depending upon what else you buy from the registrar other than just the domain, you might purchase brand protection services, you might purchase email hosting, you might purchase a variety of other products and services, and depending on how the registrar bundles those would probably result in a different pricing structure. So again, if you're going to register in .bank, we certainly hope that you do. We encourage you to look at the information that registrars are providing. Clearly, if you're an ICBA member, you're getting a deal from Encirca along with some other value-added assistance, such as the pre-screening. But you should shop around and consider what best suits your needs.
Okay, thank you, Craig. And now, where can banks find the approved registrars list?
So I'm sure if you go to ftld.com, there's a tab it's entitled Registrars, and there's a drop down and it says Approved Registrars, and then you'll see the 8 or 10 registrars that have currently signed up to support .bank.
Okay, thank you. Now, I know that Encirca currently offers a discount for ICBA members. Where can members find this discount code? Tom?
So the discount code will be provided to ICBA members by simply sending us an email at icba@encirca.com. We will verify that you are on the member list for the ICBA, and we'll give you a coupon if you're paying by credit card. You may also simply write us a check minus with your 10% discount factored in. Again, if you want a pro forma invoice for that, we'd be happy to generate it for you.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm getting one question a lot regarding bank's .com domain name. Does the .com domain name give the bank rights to register the same name as a .bank?
So I'll take that one, Tom, if you're okay with it. Just because you have a domain name in any other domain extension, whether it's .com or .net or .org, it doesn't give you any, it doesn't entitle you to the same domain name in .bank. I mean, you can certainly apply for it, just as you did when you got the name in .com, but there's no implied right to it.
Okay, thank you. Now, I want to start wrapping it up and only take a couple more questions. One would be regarding Encirca's ICBA discount. Does that include the first year, or does it include multiple years, the renewal years? And what happens at the end of the first year?
So this is Tom Barrett from Encirca. The way the renewal process works, about 90 days before the expiration date, we will send you out a renewal notice, and there'll be several more reminders as your expiration date approaches. The discount will certainly apply if we are still working with the ICBA as part of this arrangement, and as far as we know, that arrangement does continue past the first year renewal of your domain names.
Okay, thank you. And regarding Encirca's pre-screening process, could you help explain what exactly that does before general availability occurs, and when will verifications take place during this process?
Sure, this is Tom Barrett again. And so there is no requirement, certainly, to go through a pre-screening process. You can wait until the gates open after June 23rd and simply apply at one of the accredited registrars for your name. The issue is you may apply for a name that gets rejected by Symantec. And if that happens, then there will be a fee withheld from your payment when you apply for that name. And so what the pre-screening process does, first and foremost, is to make sure that the name you're applying for, in fact, you are eligible for and won't get rejected by Symantec. There are no guarantees, obviously, but we've seen a lot of applications. We do a lot of day-to-day consulting with the registry, and so we have a fairly good idea of whether or not your orders and names would be accepted by the registry. The other thing the pre-screening process does, of course, we want to make sure you're a bona fide bank, and obviously if you're an ICBA member, you are. But we also want to make sure you understand what the expectations and requirements are in order to complete the verification process. And so by making sure you provide us with the person at the HR department or your supervisor who can both confirm your employment and confirm you're authorized to be submitting these names on behalf of your bank, make sure that those approvals and expectations have been communicated to the right people so that when they receive a call from Symantec, the verification process goes through smoothly.
Okay, thank you. So the sense I'm getting is if a bank plans on participating during general availability, they do not need to wait until June.
Right. So obviously the other main benefit here is that if you have a name that is competitive, you think some other banks might want that same name, by going through the pre-screening process, you will be in our queue that we submit automatically at 8 p.m. on June 23rd. And so by being there the minute the gates open, you're more likely to be successful in your application than if you wait a few days later to apply for that name.
Okay, thank you. Now, this will be the last question regarding .bank security. Will it be required for a bank to purchase an SSL certificate or something along these lines for this type of domain name?
Yes, that is a requirement.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you, John, Tom, and Craig. I'd like to thank members of the ICBA for joining us today. I hope this webinar was informative and provided insight to the .bank domain name. If you have any more questions, feel free to email us at icba@encirca.com or john.mcelwain@nelsonmullins.com for trademark questions. This webinar has been recorded, so the recording and the slides will be available at the website you see on your screen, encirca.com/ICBA. Thank you very much, and everyone have a good day.
Thank you.
Goodbye.